You've had to go back to some of the nouns of the 50s, certain products and styles and ad slogans, foods that we don't eat anymore. Were there words that you rediscovered in writing Underworld that you found to be particularly evocative of the period?
One of the pleasures of this book was rediscovering the language of the 1940s and 1950s. I'm not sure I can cite particular words, but when I tried to reconstruct the street argot of my own background in the Bronx, one of the curious pleasures of this endeavor was figuring out spellings for such strange words that in many cases I don't think ever found a life outside those narrow neighborhoods.
Such as?
Well, there's a curious word, grouch, which I've never heard spoken anywhere outside the Italian Bronx, and the word means to welsh on a debt, essentially. If you say to me, "You owe me $20, DeLillo," I say to you, "It's a grouch." This means you're not getting it. Where does this word come from? Well, I think it comes from an Italian word that means to burn. In other words, I am burning you for this money. But I've never heard it since I was 17 years old.
You've talked about the Cold War bringing a certain climate of fear and uncertainty, but you were born in the late 30s, so some of your formative years were during World War II. So really early on in your life, you were exposed to fear and uncertainty. Do you think you were shaped at all, that your sensibility was shaped at all by the war, which you must have heard something about? It wasn't being fought in your neighborhood, obviously, or even in your country, but still, it was on the radio. You might have had family who were fighting.
I think I was too young, in fact, to have been deeply influenced by it. I think the Cold War had a deeper effect. And I think there were two levels of danger that we experienced in those years. Obviously, the possibility of a nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union, but there was also a psychological sense that flowed from the assassinations and social disruptions of the 1960s. And even though I was older then, I think these things shaped my work, surely, more than anything I experienced when I was 8 or 9 or 10.
I believe both your parents were Italian immigrants, and I'm wondering if they spoke Italian a lot in the house, and if you were, as a boy, exposed to two languages at the same time, English and Italian.
I was exposed to two languages, but we were brought up as American kids, and I spent my younger life, playing in the streets, every sort of street game ever devised. The last thing kids my age in those days wanted to do was to appear to be European. And to my regret, I would say that I did not master Italian as a youngster, and speak only a kind of sporadic Italian now.
Do you think that hearing a lot of Italian in the house and in the neighborhood affected your ear for language in any way, even though it was something you wanted to really avoid at the time? Maybe it was even an embarrassment to you at the time.
Well, the language in my work, which is the only language that matters to me really, is so deeply woven in consciousness that I'm not sure I can understand how it began to manifest itself. I do know that I have a curious relationship to the page. I use an old manual typewriter, largely because of the sensuous sensation of hitting the keys and watching and hearing the hammers strike the page. And I have a kind of audio-visual connection to language. That is, I'm not only aware of the rhythms of my sentences, which is something I think that characterizes my work, but I'm also conscious of the the physical appearance of those alphabetic units that compose a given word. There is a relationship between certain letters that strikes me in a rather important way, and it was only recently that I was reading the afterword to a translation of the Odyssey, in which the translator Robert Fitzgerald mentions, in connection with Greek letters, the cut or sculpture of these letters, which is exactly what I respond to while I'm writing. It's a process that seems to happen automatically.
Visually, you're talking about?
Visually, yes, absolutely. Certain words will arrange themselves based in large part on the connection, the shape of the letters in those words. I might connect a word like dull with a word like lurid, which has an L, which has a D, which has a U, largely because of the visual relationship the two words have. This happens not through painstaking writing and rewriting. It tends to happen automatically.
Do you also read the sentences out loud as you're writing to see how the rhythms sound?
No, I don't. I hear it. And I hear it as it happens, and rarely have to revise a sentence on the basis of rhythm alone. These things seem to arrange themselves.
The point of view in your novel shifts several times, and often you're sometimes writing in the second person, in the you.
Yes.
That strikes me as a very difficult form to pull off, to keep up with. And I'm wondering why you chose to write in the you, in the second person, when you did, and what it means to write that way. You know, what the difficulty is.
I think it all derives from the first sentence of the book. He speaks in your voice. I decided that periodically I would return to that second person singular. Sometimes, in fact, it becomes second person plural. And I think it was a way of continuing the theme that is announced in the first sentence, that there is a connection between us, those of us who are Americans, despite our very different origins, our very different orientations. The you is a unifying you. And I think one of the things early in the book that connects people is the voice of the baseball announcer, Russ Hodges, a voice heard, of course, beyond the borders of the stadium where the game is being played, heard by people on the stock exchange and by people in kitchens and by people in bars. And this is the first connective thread in a book that eventually connects many things.